Hiya, and welcome back to another episode of Dissidents and Dictators. I'm Elisha Maldonado here with the one and only Casey Michelle.
Hello.
And of course our trusty producer, Omar Al-Fotihi. We have a really special episode for you today. We'll be joined by Sebastien Lai, son of Jimmy Lai, the pro-democracy media tycoon who has been imprisoned in Hong Kong under Beijing's draconian national security law and whose trial just got underway in December. All of that coming up. Hi, Casey.
Oh, hey, Elisha, how you doing today?
Good. It's been a while, I feel like.
It's
since
been
I've
a little
seen
bit.
you.
You look rested, you look relaxed, you look refreshed.
That's good to hear because I feel none of those things inwardly.
That's okay, that's okay. How was your holiday break? How was your New Year? How was everything?
Well, I'm going to tell you a tale that some of our colleagues have already heard, and it's just me continually whinging. So it was a fine holiday. Uh-huh. My mom was in town for a couple of weeks, and once I got used to having someone else in a small studio, we had a great time.
Space is at a premium in this city.
But on New Year's Day, I woke to my British mother screaming at the top, a blood-curdling scream, as she watched a mouse come down the hallway of my apartment.
Oh, but mice are so cute.
Do not. They are not, sir.
Those big
they
ears.
They absolutely are not.
Those big eyes. They're so sweet. Little squeaks. It
is not a Kuna Matata in my world at all. I am so upset. I'm so upset. The stress levels are up here. And so we didn't see one for 6 days after, I didn't. So at least until 2 days ago, I was able to say that I had not seen a mouse in my apartment. So I was able to lie to myself. And then I saw a little baby one, and I don't know how because my house is pristine.
The cutest of the bunch.
The only thing, I've been trying to tell myself because literally the stress is, I can't even think straight. I honestly cannot. Is that, did you ever watch The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe growing up?
Absolutely, I did. What a great book, what a great film.
I keep telling myself, like when I'm going to bed, I'm like, oh, there's mice. I keep telling myself the mice chewed off Aslan's bindings when the White Witch tried to kill him.
That's right, that's exactly. It's all coming back to me now.
So that is, I'm trying to force that as a comfort, and I don't know if it's worked yet.
Now, Elisha, I gotta be honest, I was being a bit facetious earlier. We had mice a few years ago, and I would not wish mice on my very worst enemy. Frankly, I wouldn't even wish mice on the Putins, the Maduros, or the Xis of the world.
I know.
That's how bad mice are.
I know.
I tell you.
How many did you have?
Oh, too many to count. And I tell you, some of them aren't with us anymore. And again, we don't need the details. But the point is, no mice. And you got plenty of sleep, plenty of rest, and you're ready to hit 2024, hit the ground running.
I hope so. I
make it the year of democratic expansion, democratic success,
it can only
democratic entrenchment.
Yeah.
Put the dictators on their back heels.
Let's put them back on it. That's the only way to go up from my New Year's Day.
Well, that's what we're here to talk about today. Again, to look at those that are actually pushing democracy forward, those are actually putting the dictators on their back heels and making 2024 and all the years that follow for the rest of this decade and beyond one of increasing, expanding success for the democracies both at home and abroad. So, at least I understand that you had a conversation that we're going to listen to right now.
Yeah.
You want to give us a little bit of an idea about who we're talking to and what we're going to hear?
Yes. Great privilege to talk to Sebastian Lai. He's the son of Jimmy Lai, who's been imprisoned in Hong Kong since December of 2020, and they finally are going to trial in December of 2023. So we talk about the case and how unjust and wrong it is, and how Jimmy loves and fights for democracy, and how he stayed when he didn't have to do, and we just really get into all of that and so.
And how Sebastian carries that fight forward as well.
Yes, he's very much his father's son in that, he hasn't been able to see his father in three years and hasn't been able to speak to him either, and that's because of, in large part, because he's continuing his dad's work and going around the world and speaking on his behalf and talking to the UN and, yeah.
Democracy runs in the family.
Yeah, 100%.
Good. I can't wait to listen. I'm excited.
Sebastian, thank you so much for joining us, especially in Taipei, many hours ahead of us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me.
I've written about your father quite extensively, but I'd rather hear about him in your words. And so for those listening who don't know who your father is or his case, tell us about him and why he's unjustly on trial in Hong Kong right now.
Yeah, sure. So my father is Jimmy Lai. At 76, he's the oldest political prisoner in Hong Kong. He has been in jail now for more than 1,000 days. And as you mentioned, he's currently on trial. A lot of people are calling it one of the landmark trials under this new draconian national security law. And he's essentially on trial because he was the biggest publisher. He was the publisher of the biggest newspaper in Hong Kong. It also happened to be a pro-democracy newspaper. And so when the national security law came down, he was arrested. His colleagues were arrested. The Hong Kong government sent 500 people to raid the Apple Daily newsroom and essentially close the newspaper down and have imprisoned my father and his colleague, and he still remains in jail now. So this trial, in a sense, it really is Hong Kong, the city that was once known for its freedom, known for its free speech, putting its own freedoms on trial because they can't. They can't still claim that they have the rule of law or the free press, and put a journalist like my father and his colleagues in prison and essentially have these completely sham allegations against my father. Before being a publisher, my father landed in Hong Kong as a stowaway when he was 12 and really fell in love with the freedoms of the place. He came from communist China, which obviously at that point was going through the Great Famine, and he went to Hong Kong and found all these freedoms that the British had put in place because Hong Kong was a British colony, and he as a self-made man, he eventually founded Giordano, which was one of the biggest clothing companies in Asia, and decided to put his talents and fortunes to further free press and democracy in Hong Kong. And that's why he started Apple Daily. And the idea was that with information is choice and choice is freedom. So Apple Daily was going to be this news source that wasn't afraid to call out the powerful, wasn't afraid to cover communist China, even within the confines of Hong Kong. And so because of that, he is now, and because of his pro-democracy activism, he is now in prison.
Right. I think, so when we met earlier this year, or I guess last year, and with Mark Simon, who worked with your father for many, many years, and I think that he had said something, or was it he or you who said that because your father and Apple Daily were so aggressively going after, the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, because they were the only ones holding them to account, the CCP was rounding up the newspapers and trying not to sell them, and I think your father said something like you couldn't get better advertising than that.
Well, when he first started Apple Daily, his competitors essentially paid people to throw his newspapers in the sea, and burn them and whatnot, and it made for great advertising because people were now thinking, well, what's this newspaper that's getting burned, that's getting destroyed, and so Dad basically said, well, had I known this, I wouldn't have put so much advertising behind this newspaper. But yeah, he because of his journalism, because he was always just said what he believed was true. He got in a lot of trouble. For example, there was this one time he criticized, well, actually, he insulted Li Pang, the butcher of Beijing, the person who ordered the Tiananmen Square crackdown, in a op-ed piece in his magazine. And he called him a son of a turtle egg, which you could sort of imagine is not a very nice thing to say to someone. And Li Pang was premier of China at that point, so because of that, he had to either sell his Giordano, the clothing brand, or his stores were going to get closed unless he apologized. So he decided to Sal Giordano, because he knew that as long as he had business in China, it was a possibility that he was going to get compromised. So he I mean, I think very early on he put speaking the truth in front of making money.
Yeah, and I wrote about that experience in this piece for the Washington Times that ran on Christmas Day, and I had said in that, he did something that the CCP, that they didn't expect him to do, which is to give up a huge fashion empire in the name of, freedom, to be able to speak his mind. And so he's always been a man of deep principles and deep faith, and I love the story too, going back to when he's a stowaway, and I think you tell the story when he realized, there's food to have here, and also this boss speaks English, and so I must learn English, and also this is a way to create a name for myself. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So he was when he first arrived in Hong Kong, he started working in a glove factory. And he learned English, right? And I think someone asked him afterwards, in all these years after an interview, why did he have the foresight to learn English? And he just says, well, everybody that was pointing at me, telling me to do stuff, spoke English. So I figured it's probably a good idea to learn English. And for him, I think he, even though it was a very tough time, being 12-year-old in this city entirely by yourself, and doing really very tough manual work. Glove factory. I mean, one of his fingers, a part of it is missing because he caught his finger in one of the machines. He's practically deaf from one of his ears because he just because of the working conditions, it was so loud. So it was very tough. But he always tells me that for him it was. I mean, it was like heaven, like ending up in Hong Kong, because in Hong Kong he had hope. Yeah, he had freedom, and therefore for him he could see a way forward. Right. And I think for him, it's the same feeling. I mean, he's in one of the interviews, he was asked why he's taking the stance for democracy, when obviously it wasn't the business thing to do. It wasn't the pragmatic, quote unquote, thing to do. He says, well, what's the point of money if you don't have freedom? That's true. And I think that encapsulates him very well. I mean, in the end, it's this child laborer this child who left China at 12, pursuing freedom, and to this day he keeps pursuing this freedom, but this time it's on a wider scale and for Hong Kong. Yeah, he's just the best. And speaking to that too, that love of freedom that he has, I think that this is one of the most important things every time I think of Jimmy, that I feel like I always have to highlight. So I'd love to hear you kind of really expound on it, is that he chose to stay, knowing what is likely inevitable, which is a life imprisonment, because that's what the CCP has been really hankering for this entire time. And we can talk more about that. Yeah. But he chose to stay. He could have left. He's a British citizen. He had the money to do it. And yet he stayed. Can you talk why that was important for him to do so, what his brain space there is, knowing that he also loves freedom? Yeah, he has an interview right before the handover and right before 1997, and I saw this in the BBC archives, where he was asked, if he's going to leave now that China is going to take over Hong Kong and all these freedoms might one day be gone, which they are now. And he thinks about it for a second, and he tears up a bit. He says, "No, Hong Kong's my home. I'm not going to leave unless my life is threatened." And for the next 25 years, he every day he's woken up and he's chosen to stay. And it was never smooth sailing, right? Like, our houses were firebombed a few times. There was once where a dog was skinned and pinned on our doors. He had people following him. He had a assassination attempt. But throughout all this time, he has always decided to stay. Because he knew that what he was doing was, it's pretty simple, because he knew that what he was doing was the right thing, and he chose to stay even when the national security law came down and people told him that he was going to get arrested. He knew that he had to stay with his colleagues. He had to stand by the people, stand with and stand by the people of Hong Kong, and do all he can in the pursuit of freedom and democracy.
And now, are some of his colleagues on trial as well? I mean, I know he's the big catch there, but are they also facing similar fates?
So they are testifying.
Okay.
I don't know enough to go into too much detail about the trial. But the Washington Post recently had a news article about how some of the some of his the people testifying against him were essentially tortured.
So they're tortured into testifying against him.
So the government is torturing people to. Well, I mean, the Washington Post article was that the government is torturing people to testifying against him. But look, I mean, it's obviously absolutely horrible that this is happening. Hong Kongers and to his colleagues. But I think this is obviously it's a symptom of the demise of the Hong Kong legal system.
Right. Yeah.
Like this absolutely arbitrary use of the law. I mean, it's worth noting that Dad was, pro-democracy, pro-free speech, but he was completely anti-violence.
Right.
And so it's completely ridiculous that they have 1,000 police officers outside the courtrooms to monitor the place 24/7. I mean, this is what Hong Kong is now. Right. It's not about following the law. It's how can they use the law to weaponize against people who believe in democracy. Which by the way, I hope we all do, and everybody that listens to this podcast do.
I agree too. And I think that's important to note. That your father's been in jail since December of 2020, and they were using these. We were talking about peaceful assembly. And that's one of the charges that they threw at him for unauthorized assembly. So he got a 13-month sentence for that, which we all know was him just, advocating for a peaceful vigil at the Tiananmen Square.
He went to a Tiananmen Square vigil, lit a candle and said a prayer. And for that, he got 13 months. And he got another unauthorized assembly charge. I think it was 11 months. And for that one, he attended a protest that had 2.1 million people,
right?
As well. Course. So that's
single that one out.
That's 30% of the that's 30% of the Hong Kong population. I mean, it's ridiculous, obviously, but it is a weaponization of the legal system. And it's worth noting that Hong Kong is a financial center. The law is very important everywhere, but in the financial center, it's hard to have a financial center that doesn't run on that doesn't have the rule of law.
That's right. And I think that there are so many beautiful Hong Kongers out there who are, throughout the demonstrations, in 2019 and before, who have strong voices. But I think, your father was a unique case in that he married wealth, principles, and a very strong personality. I think he said at one point he was a rebel at heart, so they weren't going to tell him what to do ever. And he showed the Hong Kong government and the Chinese government that the values that he has, the values that we all hold, and the people of Hong Kong went out on the streets for for sale, that they're not for trade. Right. I think that is something that is incredibly important, because there was a narrative in Hong Kong telling people that, these were just young kids, they're just angry because they can't buy houses or they don't have enough money or whatever it is. It was very dismissive, right? They didn't understand that there was this intangible thing called freedom that people yearn for, even beyond the self-preservation. It's so divorced from the CCP's reality. And one of the things that the CCP does so well, I think one of their most vile power plays is not just punishing the person who has, quote, done them wrong, who has gone against them, how dare they, but, and then in this case, of course, your father's freedom and human rights, speaking out for them simply. But they like to mete out the punishment on relatives and descendants and stuff like that. I know, if memory serves, like you haven't been able to talk to your father in 3 years, and you can't go back to Hong Kong.
Yeah, of course, yeah, because of what I'm doing now. For example, being on this podcast, just by nature that it's an American, or it's that you're based in America, and that it's an international organization.
Yeah.
I could very well be, quote unquote, colluding with foreign forces, and that could end me. I could end up in prison for this. And so, as a result of speaking out on my father's behalf, I have not been able to go back to Hong Kong.
Right.
It's obviously a very unusual situation, not being able to go back home.
Right.
But I know that I'm doing the right thing, trying to get my father out. And then just as he knew that he was doing the right thing, trying to get democracy for Hong Kong.
Very much your father's son.
Yeah, I mean, I think you just gotta do what you gotta do if you know it's right. Yeah,
100%. I said this to you when we met in September, but I got the supreme privilege of meeting your father just once, and I still consider that like an honor of a lifetime. Just to share some of the same air with him, and I'm just I think that he's amazing and proud of him. As much as I could be, being here, and I'm always praying for him. And I would tell him that via text once a month. I didn't want him to get, he was busy doing other more important things, but I would just send him a text, and I just want, you to know that I just really adore him and I admire him a lot. I would hope that I would have that kind of will and fortitude to do the same sort of thing. So, what's next here? We've got a trial going till March, right?
Yeah, so it's they're aiming for 80 days. So okay. March, April time.
Okay. Yeah. And we kind of, I think I read, I think maybe you were speaking in The Guardian saying that, the outcome is kind of already kind of written on the wall here.
Well, exactly. It's just in line with what's happened to my father over the last 3 years. It's they want to keep him there as long as they want to keep him there, and they'll just write the laws around that.
Right.
It is very hard for even me, who grew up in a system with a rule of law, to sort of wrap my head around it sometimes. But it is what it is. It's a legal system getting weaponized, and free speech, free press getting cracked down on, and that's what it is. So they're just going to write their laws around how long they want to keep my father in jail for. Yeah, so it's quite depressing because at his age, 76, he could. It's every day he's in there, his life is in danger, essentially.
Right. And we know that, he's had some health issues in the past, and so it's just not a place where he deserves to be and where he shouldn't be. But I hope for his release one day. I think that's always, I think you have to keep on hoping for those sorts of things, even if the outcome seems predetermined. But I've talked about, and he talks about, and, Bill McGurn, who's his godfather and a friend of mine, my former boss at the Post, talks a lot about how your dad, answers to a higher power because of the higher power of his belief. And so I think, for those of us who care about him, there's a small sort of balm in that he's so assured of that too,
Yeah. I think when someone has given everything that they have in pursuit of their belief and what they know deep down inside is right, on a human level, it's a pretty comforting place to be.
Yeah.
So obviously, I want to see my father again, and I he shouldn't spend another second in prison. But thank you. I'm sure he appreciates very much that you're thinking of him and praying for him. His religion has been a pillar.
Yeah.
That's kept him strong.
Yeah. I always say, working in human rights as we do here, I always say all it takes is one case where these abuses to become real to you. All you need is one. And, I was already, obviously care about human rights and freedom, but meeting your father for that first time and just seeing, just the way he fills a room, but so quietly too at the same time.
Yeah.
And then to see how they've, made him suffer and how they've tried to, rather. And so it feels personal now on a level, So now I have a personal fight with the CCP from New York. Anyway, not to make it about myself.
No, thank you. I would agree with that. In the end, I think he's someone that, obviously I'm very fond of. I love him because he's my father, right?
Yeah.
But even on a human level, it's someone that I'm very fond of.
I'll never forget getting out of a bus in Taipei in 2019 at his house, and I was flagging because I'd only had 4 hours of sleep, and there is your father standing in the driveway in his standard Adidas pants and a suit jacket with his hands behind his back. And someone said, Mark Simon, his right hand, said, we've got 2 flagging. And your dad yelled, coffee and champagne right away. The first words. And I will hold that in my memory forever. Right away. And then, of course, he did not stop letting me eat as much as I begged.
Right.
No, I'll serve you now. You're not done. I'll serve you.
Well, he really loves his food. Did you know that he's actually a French knight?
No.
Yeah. So
how did that happen?
He got a real kick out of this. So he wrote a lot about French food.
I love it.
He wrote a lot about French food. My mum loves France. We're fluent in French. Dad is not actually. So we're all fluent, but he's not. So we spend a lot of time in Paris and in France. And so he wrote a lot about French food. And actually a lot of these essays would be taken by people from Hong Kong, Taiwan, and apparently even China. Wow. And they would go to those restaurants and try it. So one day he randomly got he just got a letter from the embassy saying, well, we would be honored to give you the agricultural merit.
I love this.
Yeah.
That is a Jimmy Lai fact I did not know.
Yeah, French Knight of the agricultural merit, which he always finds it very funny. And every time I tell people this, they think, well, mate, did he get a knighthood because of his fight for freedom? No, it was literally for food.
It's food. And just when you think he can't get cooler.
Yeah,
he does. Yeah. He does love the food, and I enjoyed quite a bit of it. And even when I couldn't eat anymore, I enjoyed more of it.
Yeah.
Now, is there anything that you want us to leave us with about Jimmy, or anything to know, or anything you would just like to say?
I think, I hope that people keep an eye on what's happening with my father and tell his story as well, because it's such a beautiful story, right? A person who stows away in Hong Kong and falls in love with the place and sacrifices everything he has in order to stand up for this very intangible thing, but that all of us understand intuitively that freedom is important. So pray for him and keep an eye out, because I think that's how we get my father out, by putting pressure on the Hong Kong.
Absolutely. Yeah, keep his name in the news. It is a story the movies are made of, so.
Yeah.
He's the best. Thank you so much for joining us, Sebastian, and I will be praying for him as I always do.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, at least that was a great conversation.
Oh, thank you. I had a really good time talking to him, in as much as you can have a good time talking about that subject matter.
I obviously, I follow the news as much as anyone, and obviously Jimmy's name has been plenty in the news the last few weeks, certainly in the last month or so. I'd like to think I'm relatively well versed in his story, and certainly what he's been pushing for, and how Beijing has been cracking down on him in particular. Although I confess, I did learn a few things. I don't think I knew. What was it? The French knighthood.
The French knighthood, Casey. I learned that as well.
Of all the things.
It brings me such joy.
As if he hasn't done enough with his life.
As if he's not cool enough.
Right there. No, it's absolutely right. I mean, look, I've and I will say, speaking on my behalf, I've unfortunately never met the man. I certainly hope to at some point down the line. Obviously, once he is freed and can continue his work, he and Sebastian together. You have met him. I think you mentioned that earlier. You've met him. You've broken bread with him. Let me turn to you. Let me be the questioner. What was that like, just from a personal experience on your end, to meet a man like that?
I think about it often, just because, as I say to Sebastian, I just can't even believe that I got to share the same air, just absolute awe of someone who's just so amazing and who's going up against the CCP. It feels like just a strong man by himself in so many ways. But other than that, I reference, what he was wearing when I was getting to his house. But I was a part of a delegation, and I was the only woman there. And so when we sat in we had some coffee and champagne or whatever before dinner. what felt like it was maybe more than 10 courses. I don't know. It was just heaps and heaps of food.
It's a lot of food.
And it was there's a giant table, and there was the lazy Susan, so everyone can, just roll it around. And I got pride of place sitting next to Jimmy, which I will just take forever to my grave as a great source of pride. And at some point I turned to him, the wine is flowing, and I said, I cannot possibly eat any more food, Jimmy. And he said, oh, sure you can. And I said, no, I assure you that I cannot. And he said, that's all right. I'll take care of it for you. I'll take care of it for you. And every time a new course comes out, he stops the table, he, scoots it around and bills me a heaping plate.
Yeah.
And of course I ate it.
Of course,
I was going
as
to.
one does.
I was going to. Of course I was.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
What
I
a
think
memory.
it's a fun story.
And this was a lazy Susan that you were using?
Yeah, his table, it was a giant table that you just spin the food around. I think it's popular in Asia.
What shape would you say this table was?
A circle.
Circles, so you could say it was round?
Yeah.
So you could almost say there were knights at this round table?
The night, at least one night, a night of a round table.
Boy, oh boy.
And he was the number one.
And I will see myself out.
I think that's brilliant. I like the way he did that.
Thanks, Elisha.
Ba-dum-bum.
All right, well, we'll see everyone again for more fun puns.
Yep, the best.
Fantastic conversation. This time next week, stay tuned.
And thanks again to Sebastian. The Human Rights Foundation is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that promotes and protects human rights globally, with a focus on closed societies. We promote freedom where it's most at risk, in countries ruled by authoritarian regimes.